Okay, so in this series, I'm going to just kind of put up a little bit of materials I'm using for a specific course I'm building on composition, and mostly based around dramatic composition and the tools that are used to obtain that kind of the kind of dramatic sound that a lot of people are often looking for, especially in like film score kind of stuff, mostly in the sci-fi and fantasy genre, you know, the two biggest genres everybody seems to want to get into. But I'm not overly into most modern soundtracks, and I'll explain that later in a different video because it's just a personal preference. Back on topic, opposite motion, coming together, going away. Really hardcore technical terms. So the classical masters were masters at opposite motion. They might do a sequence like this. I can't do it fast because I'm not a great keyboard player. I'm more into composing. But this might be part of like a piano sonata or a concerto, okay? But what I'm doing here is I'm gradually closing in on myself. Well, the part's gradually closing in. And secondly, the parts, just the changes are going the opposite direction like this. But it's gradually coming together. And let me actually record that into the sequencer and speed it up. And by the way, that's just all chord tones. There's no non-harmonic tones in there. So sped up, something like that sounds very impressive, and that's what the classical masters knew. They knew that this opposite kind of motion closing in on itself is a very powerful effect, even with just chord tones. So let's switch styles here for a second. You could use opposite motion in other types of composition, say early 1920s music, emulating that. Right here. Sounds totally different from the classical kind of sound, but they're still using the same techniques, opposite motion. So this melodies and the harmonies generally rising while the lower end is falling. Let's play the basic chords without all the chromaticism. Okay, that's part of chromatic harmony too, and I do have a course on this, especially in-key chromatic harmony. Now let's listen to something completely different. Okay, so this is what I want to focus on for this particular video, but we're going to do it much simpler. Basically, that sequence started out with a light texture and gradually expanded outwards. I'll play a simplified version. Now that I can't obviously play the entire orchestrated version, so that's basically what happens at the chord level. This is the limitations of piano. You can't do the entire sequence, but it's moving away from itself and the texture is getting thicker and thicker until it reaches a high point. Now here's the opposite happening, closing in on itself. Now I actually have that in my Media Composer playlist. That's from the augmented scale, the end of my sequence for the using the augmented scale in place as an alternative to the diminished scale. That's why I stuck it in there. But it's really dissonant, and it's just an alternative to always using the diminished scale. So you might want to go check that video out, because that's what opened the video too. That was just the ending of it. So this is what we're going to concentrate on, creating opposite motion for dramatic reasons, like those last two cases were. And we'll just use simple diatonic movement and maybe one altered chord, because we're going to use B minor, I think. So we're going to start B minor, and we'll just go, know what we'll do? We'll have a target chord of the F sharp major, the 5 chord. But what we're going to do is go straight parallel downward first. We'll write this out like this. 1, flat 7, flat 6, minor 5, minor 4, flat 3, diminished 2, major 5. Okay, that's our sequence. Now that's going in direct parallel motion. So going in direct parallel motion like such doesn't sound overly dramatic, and I'm just going to continue to leave it just as chords. Everything is going parallel with each other. So one reason I might want to make opposite motion in this case is to create a dramatic buildup, and I might do it like this. And also doing the two parts in opposite motion, the lower end and the upper end, also gives it a sense of almost independence as well. Now if the texture becomes thicker, the farther you get apart, it'll create a dramatic situation like that. The moving away from itself and gradually, obviously there's limitations with piano. So maybe you start out with a light texture, gradually increase in texture, and gradually, if you're using instrumentation, gradually add instrumentation as it expands away from itself. But still the chord progression is parallel until we get to the diminished 2. It's completely parallel, except we're going in opposite motion. It no longer sounds parallel. So you might do something like this. And then go back to B minor. So it's used kind of a build up to get back to your 1. And I'm staying very diatonic. So this is a good trick maybe the sci-fi / fantasy people might want to learn, is this opposite motion. Instead of going parallel like this. It sounds okay, but this definitely sounds better going in the opposite direction, especially for a build-up. So if you're thinking about creating some kind of crescendo to your 5 chord, opposite motion may be the way to go, instead of just going downwards like this, diatonically through chords. Now we're going... has a totally different sound to it, and it's still the same chord progression. Now I might use the parallel chord progression if I'm creating more of a fall off after a high point by holding a pedal point and just playing parallel like that. But if I want to create more of a, like I said, a dramatic situation with a pedal point even, I might choose this opposite kind of motion and then go back to our 1 and typical film score kind of moves, chromatic medians and another third related shift, a tritone shift maybe, but flat 6. So a pedal point's a totally different topic. I'm just showing you how you could use the upper sequence for a dramatic build-up with a pedal point. Whereas you might use the pure parallel thing as a fall-off after a long dramatic rise. And dramatic music is filled with all these kind of nuances like this, these small little details. But as we saw earlier, it actually can help with just progressions that you want to make sound like 1920s music or an early 1900s music.